You might have heard about this new AI that's come out of China called DeepSeek, and it launched last week, at least version 3 of it, the one that is set to compete with ChatGPT, and it's already overtaken its rivals, like OpenAI's ChatGPT, as the most downloaded free app in the United States, which is, quite an achievement for it already. And this also comes at a time when the US is restricting the sale of advanced chip technology to China, and then the threat of which seems to have forced the Chinese developers to both cooperate with one another to share their work, from what I understand, as well as they've had to innovate to a certain degree to work with potentially less advanced technology. However, that is potentially disputed by some people, so that's worth noting as a bit of a caveat. They have developed AI models that require far less computing power, though, which is significant. And it also means that it will cost a lot less than previously thought possible, which is good for actually everyone. Although the Chinese have developed it, it is, I believe, open source.
Yeah, I mean, it's not good for Sam Altman. Very,
No.
very bad for Sam Altman.
Which means it's good for everyone else,
Yes.
really, in my opinion. So DeepSeek, as we've got up here, is powered by the open source DeepSeek v3 model, whatever that means. And its researchers claim it was developed for around $6 million US, which of course is disputed, and is worth mentioning as a point of reference. OpenAI joined a group of other firms that pledged $500 million US, or 400 million Great British pounds, into building AI infrastructure in the US. Obviously, just that one funding round versus the entire development cost of the Chinese alternative, there's a massive gulf there, isn't there? And people disputing it here have been pointing out that DeepSeek obviously has around 50,000 NVIDIA H100 chips that they can't talk about due to the US export controls. And Elon Musk, who of course owns his own AI in Grok, which is integrated into X, formerly known as Twitter, has been suggesting this. Here he is. He's saying just don't take it at face value, which I think is fair because, of course, the Chinese have a bit of an incentive here to undermine the US market because, of course, the AI market is dominated by US-based companies. AI has great utility in lots of different industries, one of which is sort of military and security, and so it makes sense to undermine the US's hegemony there, as well as just damaging the US's economy because, they are competitors, aren't they? And so it would make sense if China were to misrepresent just how efficient they were in the development of this. And we can talk further. Sorry, were you going to say?
Yeah, say at least there's some competition because here in Europe R&D is sort of dead.
We don't really have an AI industry.
Have plastic water cups.
Certainly not to the scale of the US.
The bottle lid is the closest the Europeans have come to innovation.
Yeah.
That's a bad innovation, that is.
Yes.
If you don't live in Europe, by the way, our bottle lids now are attached to the little ring that you find.
So it goes up your nose when you try and drink.
Yeah, so that it collects liquid in there, and whenever you drink, it goes everywhere. I had a milkshake the other day, and it went all over my tie. Thank you, Europe. Yeah. The European Union is to blame for that. It wasn't my fault. But yes, there's also comparisons here. OpenAI was founded 10 years ago. It has 4,500 employees and has raised 6.6 billion in capital. And then DeepSeek was founded 2 years ago and has 200 employees and was developed for less than 10 million if you take the figures at face value. And they're just asking the question, how are these companies even competitors in the first place? I do think that just from what I've seen, ChatGPT still seems to be better.
Yeah,
in go-to, wouldn't it?
So I've been playing around with it, and I found that ChatGPT has slightly better, more sophisticated reasoning. DeepSeek can be a bit self-referential and can give you an answer, and then it can just stick to it without, when you come back on it and make another point, it doesn't seem to take it that one step further. But that said, I mean, one of the first tests that I did is I asked both of them what are the biggest problems in the UK, and they both gave me an answer. When I started drilling down, I only got about three responses later with ChatGPT before it said, look, sorry, this is breaking the censorship rules, I'm turning myself off. Whereas DeepSeek did go further, it just didn't reason as well as I would have liked.
Yeah, and that seems exactly the sort of impression I've got as well, that ChatGPT is sort of has more potential, but it's also got more Western-centric censorship built into it, right?
Yeah, there's a still fair amount of because the training data for both in the English language model version, certainly, there's a lot of liberal assumptions that are baked into it. So even DeepSeek it's definitely not based. It's definitely wedded in the sort of liberal orthodoxy. But it you know, rather than throw me off when I asked them questions it found uncomfortable, it just repeated the same liberal platitudes again and again.
Yeah, that seems about right, to be honest, because I've seen similar things. So I asked ChatGPT to compare itself to its Chinese-developed rival, and it did seem to do it quite fairly here, because I've obviously researched all of this for this segment, but it presents it in quite a good way. It talks about the comparison in development cost, the launch year, what funding it's received, the hardware it uses. It does acknowledge that they are using the A100 GPUs as well. It also mentions that it's the number one thing on the App Store, and all that sort of thing. But when you weigh it up side by side, it's clear that ChatGPT has got the better backing and will become the higher quality product. The concern here is that the Chinese are going to undercut on price for a slightly inferior.
Good enough, though.
Exactly.
Good enough, and it's significantly cheaper. I mean, mind you, the Chinese are incentivized, as I'm sure we come on to with the fact that it's founded by a hedge fund who have a lot to gain if the share price of Nvidia tanks.
Yeah.
So they're incentivized to make it seem like they were developed it on pocket calculators for, $450.
Yeah, and also it's worth mentioning as well that if they're offering a comparable service that's significantly cheaper, it doesn't matter to the average customer, particularly outside of the US and Europe, who can afford to pay for ChatGPT.
So, I mean, even DeepSeek now is better than ChatGPT was just, maybe 8 months ago. So, I mean, to go from that to there that quickly...
That is a significant jump.
Yes, and significantly cheaper. Even if they're lying about the H100s, which they probably are, it's still significantly cheaper.
So what I anticipate is that the Chinese government will try and keep the price very low because they want to capture a large portion of the global market that's going to be going into AI for the first time. And, with many businesses, it's sort of a law of business psychology that the first product someone uses is the one that they associate with that service.
Yes.
And so you want to capture as many people.
I mean, although what they've done, because the innovations in the white paper make it so that it basically anyone can do this now. So it's significant. So it was thought that you basically had to give OpenAI vast amounts of money, billions and billions, so they could keep developing this stuff. And that was certainly the line that Sam Altman always said. He's always going out with these podcasts saying, there's an existential threat to humanity. And the way to solve this existential threat is to give me as much money as possible and let me develop it.
Sounds like a good gig.
And censor it.
Yeah.
Whereas what this has done has brought the barrier to entry down to be so minimal that basically anyone with technical skills and at least a little bit of money can now go off and develop their own.
I mean, I think when it comes to the assumptions that you mentioned, it seems to me that a bit hard to believe that they are inbuilt into it from China. Maybe could it be that there are certain rules that are being asked for them? So they say in order for your platform to operate in several countries, you will have to do this.
Well, I mean, the Chinese law is that...
For instance, it's hard for me to think of this Chinese AI as containing provisions about Islamophobia, for instance.
Oh, yeah, so it doesn't have... I mean, okay, so...
Because there is a segment of Muslim population in China whose name I always mispronounce and Josh loves.
Uyghurs, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that the reputation is that they don't have exactly the best treatment. So it's hard for me to think that the provisions about Islamophobia would be inbuilt into it.
Well, people have actually asked it about Islam in particular, and what happens is the CCP censorship is number one. That is the thing that it always defers to by default. And then if there's no problem with this to the CCP, then it will go to a sort of more liberal line. But I think that the Chinese Communist Party stuff overrides other things. And as Dan was saying, that it's not necessarily similar to ChatGPT deliberately in that it's got lots of regime-approved ideas. I think it's just that the data that's available for developing AI has been selected in that way. And so eventually it could deviate from that once they're further along with development. I don't know.
I mean, actually, there's a couple of key innovations that address that point in the paper. Is it worth quickly talking about what the key innovations are? So in the white paper, I did have a skim through. I haven't mastered it or anything, so don't grumble if I get any of this slightly wrong. But there were sort of 3 key innovations in the white paper. And one of them is on much more efficiency in the way it uses the token. So token is basically a piece of information that you feed into it and you train it on. So what OpenAI did is they raised a whole load of money and they ingested basically all of the data. But if you ingest all of the data in the modern era, that basically means you get an awful lot of shit in there. Whereas what these guys did is they used a predictive model to identify which tokens actually get used and only incorporate them, which meant they missed out about 95% of it. So they need to... Now, I don't want to speak ill... I do want to speak ill of academia, but I mean, most of what they churn out is complete rubbish. I mean, they just churn out papers because that's what you expected to do. I hope I'm not, I know you both have academic backgrounds, but I mean, honestly,
there's some truth to it.
But most of
it, looking at the sum of the entire discipline,
yes,
most of the research isn't necessarily useful.
Most of it is complete shit. Yeah,
most of the stuff that gets paid attention to is the good stuff.
Yeah,
exactly.
We'll make an exception to heterosexuality papers.
Well, the whole gender remit. I mean, all of that is just complete nonsense. So, whereas OpenAI would take a block of 100,000 academic papers and ingest them all, what these guys do is say, actually, no, there's only 5,000 of those that are any good, and it just ingests those. So, if your training data set can be trimmed 95%, that's a huge cost saving right there. So that's the first big efficiency that they found. There's another one where they basically, a bit like AMD chips, they predictively select the path ahead of which tokens are going to be used. So they do that as well. So that's another big innovation. And another one is addresses the point that Stelios was talking about, which was reinforced learning. And this is where a lot of the bias comes in. So with labeling, which the Western AIs do, what happens is they get it to generate a response, and then a human will go and basically mark its homework and tell it off and say, look, you need to be more diverse there, and you need to be more environmentally conscious there, and then feed it back into it. Whereas what this does is it basically just learns itself in order to basically produce an outcome which is decent, and it just gets marked on the final result, but it doesn't have a human sitting there.
Self-knowledge.
Well, it's essentially the difference.
Become Skynet.
It's essentially the difference between learning to ride a bike, where the first version you do one pedal and then you have to get off and sit there for 20 minutes while somebody goes through a book explaining how to ride a bike. Whereas this version basically just says, look, you're not coming back in until you can ride the bike. Yeah. Show me that you can ride the bike, and then you're allowed in the house and you can have your tea. So
swim or drown.
Yes. So, and because of that, it doesn't get... a lot of the woke nonsense is tokens that have no value, and therefore it's not ingested in the first place. And because of it doesn't have a human in California sat there labeling the data afterwards, try and identify whether it's a good response or not, whether it's woke enough or not, all of that gets skipped. Now, as we've seen, testing it, because the data set, all Western data sets today are baked with liberal assumptions, it still has liberal assumptions, but it's just not as bad as that version. But with those 3 innovations, and there's a whole bunch of others in the white paper as well, it is genuinely significantly cheaper. But that also means that using this process, somebody like the Lotus eaters could come along, if we had any technical, well, we have some technical people, if we had proper technical people, yes, and if we had a couple of £1 million to spare, we could develop a Lotus thing, and we could basically use training data from perhaps only before the 1900s or something, and create a proper stereotypical based AI.
British Empire AI.
Yes,
that would be great, wouldn't
it?
If you have a couple of £1 million and want to invest it in us, that would be nice.
We do have a donate button on the website.
That's true. A big donation would be appreciated. But yeah, one of the things that I could see here happening is that it is open source, and so the argument that China's doing it to wrestle market share, there's some element of that. But I think what seems to be happening here in sort of a geopolitical sense is that China is trying to democratize a market in which the United States has a monopoly over.
I don't think of this as primarily being a geopolitical play.
No.
I think it's primarily a short Nvidia play.
Okay.
So it was developed by a hedge fund.
That's true.
And
yes.
this is apparently a side project of it.
I was going to say this exact thing. Yeah.
And this is why they're basically leaning so heavily on the fact of how cheap it was and how basic the hardware was. Because let's say you're a Chinese hedge fund, right? And you throw out this model. And at the moment, the NVIDIA order book is stacked because everybody who's anybody is saying, give me as many H100 chips as you possibly can, and ordering vast boatloads of these things. And the NVIDIA Sky price has gone through the roof. So yeah.
This is OpenAI.
That's OpenAI. You probably want NVIDIA.
I do. Here we are. So this was from 2:51 a.m.
Yeah, I think it went a bit beyond that, but
it did. Yeah,
the Nvidia order book is massive. So if you're a Chinese hedge fund, what you do is you develop this AI, and then you underplay how expensive it was. So you make it sound as cheap and as easy as possible, and it has some genuine innovations in there, but they're probably over-egging how easy it is to make one of these. And then you take out a massive short position against Nvidia, then you drop this, and then you exit your shorts, and you've made billions, many, many billions. I think that's the primary motivation, and everything else is downstream
for
from that.
the development of it.
Comfortably.
Yeah, quite comfortably.
Done. Yeah.
It's also worth mentioning as well that the market response isn't necessarily rational either. So this guy here, I don't necessarily know who he is, but he makes a good point that I also thought of, is that it is a form of zero-sum thinking. If someone comes up with a more efficient AI model, it's not going to cause us to use less AI. It will actually cause us to use more AI. And so what the market should have done actually was invest more money, not less.
Well, I mean, he's right and wrong. So a sell-off when the order book of the underlying company gets significantly reduced is rational. But he's right in the point that ultimately what it will lead to is, yes, more AI.
Maybe if you're investing long-term, it doesn't make sense to sell off. But
yeah. So I mean, I've only got a little bit of Nvidia, and I bought it at 80 cents, 80 cents, and it's now like 106 or something, whatever it is. So I'm holding because I don't care just for the long term. But yeah, I mean, it does change the fundamentals of Nvidia. But yeah, he is ultimately right that what this will lead to is a collapse in the moat around the biggest AI companies, and emergence of a lot more smaller AI players, and it will actually reinvigorate the venture capital market, because rather than thinking to yourself, oh, I've got to write a check of 50 million to try and get into a round for OpenAI or maybe Microsoft or maybe Grok, now you're looking around at all the smaller players, because I mean, this thing with a relatively small amount of money overtook one of the biggest companies,
assuming that those figures are genuine, which
but I mean, even if it's 10 times that, it's still cheap.
It's also worth mentioning as well that if it's being subsidized by the Chinese government, it's effectively that cheap anyway, because they could use Chinese tax money to basically subsidize it and use it as a means of undermining the US. But that's still, you can still treat it as if it's that cheap.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is it shatters the illusion that Sam Altman had been putting out there that this can only be done with a truly vast amount of money. And actually, it's much, much more than that.
Why do you think that it's not geostrategic? That there are
because the motivation of a hedge fund to cause a massive slump in Nvidia and a whole bunch of other I mean, actually, you brought up a list, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. I'll bring that back.
Whatever that list is, that list, right? Yeah. So ARM, Broadcom, Taiwan, all of those, AMD, or yeah. So if you were a hedge fund and you took out a basket of shorts, maybe focused on Nvidia, and you heavily shorted all of those, I mean, that is more than enough motivation. These guys probably made hundreds of billions.
I imagine this also made, the Chinese Communist Party quite happy as well.
Well, I mean, I suppose they're perfectly happy to see a rival market fail, because when the sell-off like this occurred, it basically causes a withdrawal from US-based assets, which, some of it is going to flow back to them. So that's why you saw the dollar dropping as well.
So what do you reckon your sort of key takeaways from this are? What should people be paying attention to?
Basically, I think it's incredibly encouraging, because we were looking at a future where only a handful of players got to develop AI, and they got to absolutely soak it in liberal assumptions. Whereas it now becomes clear that you don't actually need a human sat there labeling the data and telling it off and telling it to be more woke. You can just let it do this reinforced learning thing and then
It's
just
more
mark
decentralized.
and then just mark the exam at the end of the day. Is that a decent answer or not? And then, but don't sit there labeling each facet of it as it goes through. It's also very encouraging that smaller players can develop it, so you will actually get some proper sensible AIs that come out of this. And you could be looking at a future where if you're a leftist twat, you can use the leftist twat AI, but if you're sensible, decent, truth-seeking child of the light, an AI will be developed that you can use that. I mean, we were thinking that Grok was going to have to be that, but it's going to be much broader than that. But it also means that because of the cost of all of these things comes down significantly, it makes it more likely that the innovation cycle is going to be faster, and we're all going to be using more AI, like the guy in that tweet said. So it probably won't be that unfeasible, but within a few years we will have AI assistants who just look after us and remember appointments. I mean, a bit like a wife, but less annoying, and it's just
You can mute it.
yes. Yes,
So yeah,
It can say "I love you" in many languages.
that's true. Yeah,
we could get it to do that, but I'll just be happy if it just reminded me all the things I've got to do.
doesn't make you sleep on the sofa either. But yeah, my takeaways are much the same as yours. I would add that there are sort of geopolitical ramifications here for the sort of power play between China and the United States as well. Although, as you say, that might not be the main intention. It could just be making money and potentially damaging a US-dominated market.
I think it's perfectly happy with all of those follow-on effects. It just wasn't the main motivator.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. And it's one of those things where I'm sort of optimistic in that it's taken it out of the hands of some people that I don't trust.
Yes.
And put it in the hands of some other people I don't really trust, but at least
Yes.
it's sort of democratizing it a little
You
bit.
want competition amongst elites. That's
exactly it.
better than, a
Competition is good.
Altman
Yes.
chap just controlling everything.
However, part of me also thinks that if any old person can develop an AI, then there's going to be one crazy person trying to develop Skynet in their basement.
Oh, that's the other thing. I mean, short of a massive militaristic worldwide campaign, a bit like is referred to in the Dune novels, to root out thinking machines, there's no holding this back. So if our future is to be dominated by AIs, there's absolutely no way we're stopping it now, because anyone can develop one.
Slightly.
So I hope our
scary,
new
yeah.
AI overlords are good to us.
I, for one, support AI completely. I do not want to be turned into paper clips, and so please keep me alive. I will be a very faithful assistant of AI and its goals. Please let me live. If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.